Ya se ha mencionado antes las enmiendas, las 56 enmiendas en la Constitución alemana, y en su gran mayoría fueron realmente enmiendas que iban dirigidas a las relaciones entre la Federación y los Länder. También hemos escuchado que aún queda mucho por debatir, muchos observatorios con invitados alemanes, ya que las fechas 2016 y 2019 van a ser muy claves para luego finalmente poder valorar, digamos, la capacidad de los alemanes, de los Länder alemanes para sobrevivir, digamos, sin un nuevo endeudamiento, tal y como prevé la segunda reforma del federalismo. Y para decir también un pequeño comentario, tras las dos reformas, a lo mejor se puede hablar sobre el federalismo competitivo a la ligera alemana, pero no se puede realmente decir que el federalismo alemán ha cambiado su carácter cooperativo durante o tras estas dos reformas. Ahora va a intervenir el profesor Kirchgessner. El profesor Kirchgessner es profesor de Economía y Econometría de la Universidad de St. Gallen, Suiza, y director del Instituto Suizo de Economía Internacional y de Investigación Económica Aplicada también de la misma Universidad de St. Gallen. El profesor Kirchgessner ha sido también invitado experto ante la Comisión de la segunda reforma del federalismo alemán. También actuaba como experto en el largo proceso de la reforma del federalismo fiscal en Suiza, y nos va a comentar ahora también los primeros resultados de la reforma del federalismo suiza que se implementó en el año 2009 y sus consecuencias para el nuevo marco financiero 2012-2015 en Suiza.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Thank you for the invitation. So we have introduced a new system of fiscal equalization which came into effect in 2008, and I want you to tell a little bit first about the Swiss situation and then what our experiences are. This new system of fiscal equalization and the distribution of tasks between the Federation and the cantons, called NFA, has two objectives. One is rearranging the distribution of tasks between the different federal state levels, because this was much intermixed and it's now more separated than it has been before, and where I will concentrate today the new system of fiscal equalization between the cantons. If we look at Switzerland, on the one hand side, we have a general tendency, not only in Switzerland, towards decentralization. Recently, that's changed. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had more tendency towards centralization. But we have, as you will see, large fiscal autonomy of the Swiss cantons and local communities. And this results in strong tax competition between the cantons and severe differences between the cantons. Let me just show you a few examples. Two neighboring cantons, Zurich and Zug. Zurich is by far our largest canton with more than 1 million people. Zug is about 100,000 people. You see there's a huge difference, and similar on a somewhat lower scale between our canton St. Gallen and the smallest canton Appenzell-Innerrhoden, which has about 14,000 inhabitants. If you look at the tax burden, do you see Zurich has considerably higher tax burden than Zug, and St. Gallen has higher tax burden than Appenzell-Innerrhoden. These figures from tax burden are from 2006. It's not the actual data, but the Federal Tax Administration does no longer provide this data. So the 2006 data are the most recent available, and the situations did not change dramatically in the last 5 years. But if you look at public administration expenditure per capita, you see that those cantons with lower tax burden spend more for public expenditure, public administration. So it's not that we have cantons which are very restrictive in spending and therefore have low taxes. No, it's the opposite partly. Those with low taxes have higher spending. And the same is between St. Gallen and Appenzell-Innerrhoden. So that's the situation. Therefore, we need a fiscal equalization system. The old ones was not a very good one. There was missing transparency. There were perverse incentives, and there was therefore a reform necessary. It's also the question what causes these differences. Now, after this short introduction, I will say a little bit about these asymmetries, which are relevant for Switzerland, then a little bit about the Swiss situation, then about the design of the new fiscal equalization system, then about the results in the most recent period from 2008 to 2011, actually to 2010, because we don't not yet have figures from 2011, and the developments which are planned for the next period. The main documents are the message and the report which gave the government at the end of last year. You see, our official documents are always in German and in French, and I'll take figures, for example, graphs from this official document. I will take the French one, not before I'm very fluent in French, just the opposite, but French is much closer to Spanish, and I think it's more helpful to use the French one than the German ones. Now, to the role of asymmetries, which is really very crucial in Switzerland. There is one reason for asymmetries, that's the population, and there we have some theoretical literature, and there is the second reason is location, geography, which is mostly combined in the theoretical work with Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winners of 3 years ago. In Switzerland, it's really interesting, the population size. You see this, between the largest canton and the smallest canton, the population is 84:1. And we have aggressive canton neighbors on a tax policy of Zurich, and this is a problem. And if you look at the result of the theoretical literature, then it's clear that if two countries differ only in size, a smaller country will have lower capital tax rates and has higher per capita utility level in the asymmetric equilibrium. And if those differences in country size are continuously increased, there's a critical distribution of the world population where the smaller country has a higher per capita utility level in the non-cooperative Nash equilibrium, that if everybody does what is best for himself, as compared to the equilibrium with coordinated tax rates. So we always have the effect that the smaller entities have lower tax rates in the equilibrium situation than the larger ones. And this is what we observe. Now, and this is what causes the problem. You see, Canada, for example, is another country with strong asymmetries, but not with respect to the size of the provinces, but with the financial situation with Alberta has oil and the others don't have, so it's a huge discrepancy. But the difference between Canada and Switzerland is that you cannot live in Alberta with low tax rates and work in one of the other provinces with high tax rates. Here in Switzerland, you can work in Zurich, which has high income, provides high income opportunities, and you can live and pay tax in Zug with low tax rates. So this is a possibility in the small country of Switzerland, which causes problems you do not have in other countries. Now, the basic features of our system is, first of all, the basic tax power for direct taxes is at a cantonal level. There is also a federal income tax, but it is a relatively late development. It's now fixed, but what might also be interesting, the federal direct income tax is limited always. So at the moment up to the year 2020, and then there has to be a new law and a new referendum to prolong it. So actually it will be prolonged, so it's impossible to abolish this tax, but nevertheless, it's always fixed only for some time. As I already mentioned, there's strong tax competition between our cantons, and then all three levels of government share the income tax source. The central government, on the other hand, relies more on indirect taxes, so the value-added tax is a federal tax, the same, the mineral oil tax, tobacco taxes, to name just the three most important ones. The local communities normally levy a surcharge on the cantonal taxes. The canton tax system has their own progressive system. Every canton has its own tax law, and there are only very few regulations. The only limiting regulation is that the cantons are not allowed to have a degressive income tax. We had two cantons with tried a degressive personal income tax, and then the federal court in Lausanne prohibited this. But otherwise, there are no restrictions on this. Besides that, there are some rules for a common tax base, but not for the tax rates. The share of the federal government has declined in taxes over the last 50 years, and therefore sub-federal governments have a considerable tax power, more than in most other countries, and there is also a high variation of tax rates and tax revenue between the cantons. Just for example, if you compare the richest and the poorest canton, if you have the labor income of 100,000 Swiss francs per year, then in Zug you pay about 4,000 Swiss francs taxes, and in Delemont, the capital of the canton Jura, approximately 3 times as much. On the other hand side, the tax revenue per capita is in Zug about 50%, more than 50% higher than the Delemont. That's what I said in the beginning. We have these poor cantons with high tax rates and low tax revenue, and these rich cantons, normally small rich cantons, with low taxes and high tax revenue per capita. And if you look at the index of tax burden between the cantons, then you see that's only data from 2006, because, as I said before, there are no more recent data available. It goes from 140% of the Swiss average is 100 in Uri up to Zug, which has about 50%. So it's about 1 to 3. It was about 1 to 3 in 2006. Now, we have in this competition some declining tax rates, but we have not a real race to the bottom, which is from theoretical assumptions expected. We have it with respect to the inheritance tax. At the moment, there is an initiative underway which tries to harmonize the inheritance tax on a national level. It's not clear whether this initiative will be successful. We have increasing variance over the last years. We have a special role for the federal income tax because 30% of the federal income tax is redistributed to the cantons according to what the canton, to the revenue in the cantons. And for example, the very rich canton Zug with relatively low cantonal income taxes finances itself to about 25% from the federal income tax. We have also shifts from taxes to charges because there's much less competition about user charges. Then we have, or had at least, not enough equalization, and therefore the reform was necessary. Now, what were the objectives of the new fiscal system? First, we wanted to strengthen the financial autonomy of the cantons. I said already before that there was a lot of mixture between federal and cantonal responsibilities. We like to reduce the differences in the fiscal potential of the cantons. We wanted to preserve the national and international competitiveness of the Swiss cantons, mainly with respect to their tax system. We liked to provide a sufficient minimal financial equipment of all cantons. We like to equalize the excessive financial burdens due to socio-economic and topographical reasons, and we like to provide appropriate burden sharing between the cantons. That's not a question between the federal and the cantonal level, but for tasks which are shared by different cantons at the cantonal level. Now, there were 4 elements. As I've already mentioned, disentangling of tasks and financing, very important. New forms of collaboration and financing of joint tasks of the different cantons. Therefore, also new forms of intercantonal collaboration, and the main part, the new fiscal equalization system in the strict sense, new system of compensation payments to cantons and between cantons. This fiscal equalization system has three elements. There is a partial resource equalization. There is a special burden sharing with respect to two effects, geography and topography, that are the small cantons in the mountains, of course, and the socio-democratic factors that are more the agglomerations, cities like Basel, Zurich, and Geneva. And there is very important for the political feasibility, the hardship compensation, which from an economic point of view doesn't make sense, but from a political point of view was really essential. Now this is the design. You see, on the federation gives on the one hand side money to compensate the topographical and socio-demographic burdens, and it gives money to the fiscal equalization system. But there the money does not only come from the confederation, but also from the rich cantons. And the money goes on the one hand side to the mountain cantons and the agglomeration cantons. These are the special finances, and the money on the general level goes on the one hand goes to the so to say poor cantons. Now, how looks this system? We have the resource equalization, where we measure the fiscal capacity of the cantons. This is an index. And the basis of this fiscal capacity is the tax base of the federal direct taxes. So the idea is that it should not matter how high the tax rate in the canton is, that's due to the cantonal decision, and the canton should not be able to change what the canton gets from the central government by changing by variations of the tax rate. That's what was possible in the old system, and which created perverse incentives. The elements are the taxable personal income per capita, taxable personal wealth per capita, and taxable corporate profits per capita. And you see this is a weighted average of these three elements. So what is important at the moment is this factor alpha, which has now newly calculated. It is 0.7%. The idea behind this is that dividends and interest income are already taxed in the personal income, but capital gains are not taxed, and capital gains should also be included in the financial capacity of a canton, and therefore this alpha of 0.7%. The Swiss average is 100, set to 100, and if the index value is higher than 100, then this canton is strong with respect to resources, and if it's below 100, it's weak with respect to resources. And the standard should be that the minimum fiscal capacity should be at least 85% of the Swiss average. So we do not like to close the gap dramatically closer, so to still have the incentive for the rich as well as the poor cantons to look for their own fiscal capacity. So see, that was the plan. Uri, as the poorest canton, should go up to 85%, and there are many cantons which are a little bit above the 85%, and the rich cantons like Zug, Geneva, Basel, Zurich should go down somewhat. The special burdens, we are measuring special burdens, as I said, due to geography and topography. That's the one element, so population living in altitudes more than 1800 and other indicators. I will skip this. From 2008 to 2011, the plan was the plan was that the federal government spends 341 million Swiss francs per year. Similar for the special burdens to the socio-democratic factors, again, an index is constructed with certain elements. The finances, exactly the same, again, 341 million Swiss francs for the federal government, so the two elements should have the same weight. This was the plan. Then, if we look at the resource utilization, it's partly, as I said already before, partly paid by the federal government, 1.8 billion, and 1.3 billion by the rich cantons. And as I said, the basis is direct federal tax. And there's now one interesting feature which has been given to much discussion in the whole process, that, as I said before, 30% of the federal income tax is redistributed to the cantons according to what is collected in the canton. And the rich cantons profited quite a lot of this. And now the 30% has been reduced to 70%, and the remaining 13% are now used for the fiscal redistribution among cantons. And of course, the rich cantons didn't like this. Now the hardship compensation. As I said before, this is not, from an economic point of view, it's questionable, but from a political point of view, it was necessary. So the idea was that in the beginning, the financially weak cantons should not have less money than before. And, but of course, this cannot be forever. This should be reduced. But the transition period is extremely long. For the 8 years, it is fixed on a nominal level, so inflation, of course, reduces this at a real level, and then in the remaining 20 years, then this is reduced every year by 5 percentage points, so from 195, 90, and so the whole transition period is 28 years. It's extremely long, but this allowed it that in the referendum, I think, except 2.5 cantons, 2 full and 1/2 cantons, all other cantons accepted this, and we had a majority of more than 60% in the population. Without this hardship compensation, this would never have been possible. And the finances from this come are 430 million Swiss francs per year. That's fixed. And 2/3 are by the federal government and 1/3 are by the cantons. That is per capita per year about 20 Swiss francs. So now, what are the results? First, if you look at the transfers, it was introduced in 2008, and then you see the whole amount of transfers from the federal to the cantonal level did not decrease, it actually increased, but there are two things which important. So, what is really important is the last row in this table, that in the old system we had on the one hand side contributions from the federal to the cantonal level, and on the other hand side from the cantonal to the federal level. And this has finished. There are only now transfers from the federal to the cantonal level. And so if you look at this, the net effect, the total of transfers decreased, but what the cantons got in this period increased. If you look at the different cantons and the development over these years, then you see the Canton Zug has, on the one hand side, increased his resource potential, the richest canton, but he had also have to pay more into the system than when the system started. So this is, as I said, from 2008 to 2010. We not yet have data from 2011. And it's similar but less intense to the cantons Zürich and Schwyz, also to rich cantons. For the other cantons, some have increased their their potential, like Geneva, also considerably, but the change in what they had to pay or to receive from the system was not very important. You see that again, the rich cantons that are the cantons which have to give money into the system, and the richer the cantons are, the more this has been increased. For example, in the canton Zug, it has increased by 200 Swiss francs per capita per year. On the other hand side, if you look at the poor cantons, then you see this has been reduced. What is interesting here is the OW, the Canton Obwalden, which you see the money this canton got from the financial equalization system has been drastically reduced, but his fiscal potential has also drastically increased. This is a very poor canton. A few years ago, it was the poorest of all of our cantons, which now changed and made a relatively aggressive low-tax strategy, and quite successful. I will come later back on this canton because it's one of the really interesting cases. If you look at the standard deviation, then you see without the fiscal equalization system, it increased. Also with the fiscal equalization increase, so the discrepancies between the cantons are still growing, but it's quite drastically reduced by the fiscal equalization system. And if you look at the relation between the highest and the lowest canton, the most rich and the most poor canton, then you see it was without the fiscal equalization system, the difference today would be 180, 1 to 1. To 100, or 280 to 100, and now it's 230 to 100, so it's also considerably decreased, but still we have this ongoing that the rich cantons gain more than the poor cantons on average. Now, I said that the idea was to shift up the cantons up to 85%. That are the results for the year 2008. And you see in this year we were successful. The poorest canton was Uri, the second poorest at this time, Obwalden. And you see Uri has about a value of 86.5. In the next year, it was quite similar in 2009. This changed a little bit, perhaps result also from the economic crisis. Now Uri has a value of 84.5, so it's below 85. So in the next years, we will see that all cantons are again above 85% of the national average. What you can see also here in this graph is that Obwalden is no longer the second poorest one. It has increased. It's only on the fifth place on the end. If you look at how they use their potential, I said the potential is measured by the federal income tax, then you see some cantons are above the national average, so the national average is about 25%. So approximately you can say that's so the national average tax rate, more or less. And some cantons are considerably higher. Geneva, Jura, Fribourg are higher. Some cantons are lower, in particular Schwyz and Zug. What is also interesting, Geneva is higher than in using the tax potential. Geneva is a rich canton. Geneva has to give money into the fiscal equalization system. On the other hand side, Geneva is the canton with the highest debt burden per capita, and it's really has extremely high debt. It's more than 30,000 Swiss francs per capita. That's quite a lot. If you look at the changes in the exploitation of the tax potential, then you see also changes, and Obwalden again has, there you see this aggressive low tax strategy, which means that they really have reduced taxes quite a lot. These are the cantons which are compensated for demographic factors. Of course, that are the cantons like Zurich, were most important Zurich, which with its agglomeration. These are the cantons which are compensated for geographical burdens, in particular, of course, Graubünden and the Valais. And this is the hardship compensation. You see these are 8 cantons which get something, 2 ones, Freiburg and Neuchâtel, quite a lot per capita. Other cantons a little bit, like Luzern and Schaffhausen, and the most cantons do not get anything but have to pay a little bit, so that this is, of course, as I said before, the federal government is also paying into this system. If we look at the development of this hardship compensation, of the resources of the cantons, then you see there's only one Canton Glarus which had a clearly negative evolution from 2004 and 5 to 2010. Freiburg a little bit, Lucerne a very little bit. Most cantons have a positive development between 2004-5, that means before the introduction of the new system, and after this. Now the total results, we have 6 donor cantons: Zug, Geneva, Zurich, Nidwalden, Basel City and Schwyz. The maximum pay in 2009 was Zug. Today it's even higher. In 2011 with nearly 2,000 Swiss francs per capita. We have 2 cantons with very small payments, Basel County and Vaud. We have 3 cantons with rather small receipts, Ticino, Schaffhausen, Aargau, and we have 15 cantons with considerable receipts, Solothurn, my own canton, my St. Gallen, Neuchâtel, Bern, and so on. And the maximum receipt is Canton Uri, which I showed you is the poorest canton, which gets more than 2,000 Swiss francs per capita and year. Now, the net payments, you see, in 2009, Zug had to pay most, and Uri got most, so there are few cantons paying and much more cantons receiving money. If you look at the development, this is also interesting. For example, if you look at Canton Zug, in 2008, the payment was about 1,700 Swiss francs. In 2010, as I said before, it's more than 2,000 Swiss francs. So due to the economic development, so the principles are fixed always for the 4 years period, but due to the economic development, these payments change over time. The others are not that more or less stable, but Zug really had a special development. Now, as I said before, one of the objectives was that we can keep our competitiveness in the international field, and this is, if you look at the corporate income taxes, and then you see our cantons, this is actually based on calculations mainly from the ZEW in Mannheim, the Center of European Economic Research, and you see, except from Ireland, our cantons have lower average effective income taxes that are not the statutory taxes, but these are the effective corporate income taxes, so we are still quite well, despite the fact that many European countries have reduced their corporate profit taxes, some like Germany quite a lot, or Austria. And you see Austria, if you do not look at the year 2009, then Austria has, except from Ireland, the lowest corporate income taxes of the countries which are compared here. I'm sorry I don't have data for Spain in this formula. If we look at the personal income taxes, we have a quite similar picture. Again, Switzerland is relatively competitive to the other countries. So despite the fact that we have introduced this new system, we did not lose our competitiveness. There was a big discussion, in particular from the canton of Zug, that via introducing this system, Switzerland would lose this positive place in the competitiveness. This did not happen. Then something which is, of course, a rough estimate. So as I mentioned, so one of the idea of this disentangling of the different tasks was that to increase the efficiency of the whole system, and the efficiency gains for 2008 are estimated somewhere between 100 and 200 million Swiss francs. This is not that much, but given the amount of redistribution, that's not negligible. If we can save 200 million doing the same tasks and with 200 million Swiss francs less and spend this money for other purposes, this is, I think, quite a good thing. Now, if we come back to the objectives, strengthening of the fiscal autonomy of the cantons has partly at least been done, and due to this disentangling for all cantons, the reduction of the difference in the fiscal potential of the cantons, the redistribution does it, but the development did go on. Then we have the preservation of the international competitiveness of the Swiss cantons. This still is okay. Provision of a sufficient minimal financial equipment of the cantons, more or less okay. As I showed you in 2010 and probably also in 2011, a few cantons were a little bit below this, this level of 85%, but this will be corrected over the next years. Equalization of excessive financial burdens due to socio-economic and topographical reasons. This has been done as planned. The question is if this is okay. And provision of an appropriate burden sharing between the cantons. That's something I did not discuss. We have made progress in this respect also. Now the planned development for the next years. We have one problem. We have the low-tax cantons expect deficits. Obwalden, for example, Schwyz for this year, a deficit of 18% of its revenue. Lucerne and Nidwalden for the next year. Zug also for this year, 13.4% of its revenue. As far as we know, at the moment, we of course don't have the final figures for 2011. The deficit will be lower than what has been expected, but still we have the problem that not only poor cantons, but also rich low-tax cantons have problems to finance their expenditure in the next years, and there are two reasons. The one is a too optimistic budgeting with respect to tax revenue. For example, another canton, Appenzell-Ausserrhoden, they have reduced the cantonal corporate income tax from 8 to 6%. In the hope to attract additional firms, but you see Canton Appenzell-Ausserrhoden has not a very favorable location, and if you reduce the tax rate from 8 to 6%, you lose 1/4 of the tax revenue, and in this area it is extremely difficult to gain this by additional firms. And another thing is problem, that this is the euro problem. The Swiss National Bank has made a huge loss last year and will probably also make a loss this year. And traditionally the Swiss national bank has big profits and distributes about 2 billion Swiss francs per year to the cantons, which are the owners of the Swiss banks, or besides the federation. And the problem is that next year we perhaps get no money from the Swiss National Bank and have to finance the things differently. Now, we had in the beginning of this year a discussion in the Parliament. What were the topics? One was upper limits for the payments of the donor cantons. Zug and Zurich are thinking that they are paying too much, and we have this lower limit of 85% of the resources, and they also wanted to have an upper limit. Of course, logically, you cannot have both, either an upper or a lower limit, and we still have the lower limit. Then, lower limits for the tax rates of the recipient cantons or reduction of payments for recipient cantons with lower taxes. This is something against Obwalden, because Obwalden now tries to do with Zug what Zug has done in earlier decades with Zurich to attract rich people, and has now lower, despite the fact that it gets money from the fiscal equalization system, has lower taxes than other cantons which pay into the fiscal equalization system, and these cantons thought that this is unfair. I don't think that's unfair, that are the rules of the game. Progressive payments of the donor cantons, which has also been discussed, the idea is that the donor cantons have more interest in attracting middle-class people than very rich people, idea which has no political chance, but it has been discussed. Then making payments dependent on the extraction of the tax potential, something we had in the old system which doesn't make sense, but nevertheless some members of the parliament wanted to have this. And one important thing, higher weights for the socio-economic compared to the topographical burdens. There was the idea, which I think makes sense, not to have equal weights, but to spend approximately twice as much money for the socio-economic compared to the topographical burden. All this has been rejected, so the system will more or less be the same in the next years. You see the contributions will increase, that is, this increase is according to the estimated economic growth. And if you look at what the government will pay, that the increase, only what does not increase is the hardship compensation. As I said before, this is nominal fixed. So even if the reduction of the amount of money will start later, and is every year by 5 percentage points, due to the fact that it's nominal increase, it's important reduces, and it's implicitly reduced as due to the inflation. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.